Hello everyone, it's Bram Duffee with Public Speaking Class. Today we're going to talk specifically about developing the introduction and developing the conclusions of our presentation. You know, I talked earlier in a different video about how to structure the introduction and how to structure the conclusion. And they're very much mirrored aspects of one another, and we'll be able to we'll be able to talk more about that again, but just as a quick review, the introduction starts with an attention getter, and then you tell them why you cared. You justify why you got their attention, and then you tell them what you're going to give them in the speech. So you get their attention, tell them why it matters, and then you give them an outline for, so today we'll talk about this, this, and this. So you give them a thesis, a general understanding of what's to come. This helps them follow along and pay attention and know what's happening. That conclusion is a mirrored representation of that introduction. It's going to start, the start of the conclusion is a mirror flipped of the end of the introduction. So at the end of the introduction, you said, today we're going to talk about green, blue, and red. Right? That's why you summarized it before you got into the speech. Now that you're in the conclusion part, you want to summarize it. So the start of the conclusion, you're going to summarize and say, today we've had an opportunity to talk about red, green, and blue. Right? So then you remind them why it was important for them to listen, and or why it matters to them, or why there's a connection. And then my favorite way is to connect the attention getter with the final statement in the conclusion, because it's sort of like a way of packaging up everything. And I talked about how comedians do this often, where they will tell a really funny joke earlier on in their set and then end with a reference to that joke that sort of brings the audience home and helps them know that the presentation is over, and sort of buttons everything up. So those are the dry bones of these topics. But when it comes to the introduction, I want you to imagine that the introduction to your speech is like an opening scene to a movie. This thing sets the stage, and it grabs the audience's attention. It helps the audience get a sense of what's to come. This effective introduction doesn't just start the speech, it draws the audience into your world. And then it piques their curiosity. It makes them want to stay for the whole movie, stay for the whole show. In this opening scene, you introduce the main characters, the topic, the thesis, the purpose, and the main points of the speech. You establish your credibility. That's what happens there. They're going to figure out, okay, if does this person know what they're talking about? And it's not that you're just the director, you're also the expert of the subject matter. And most importantly, you motivate the audience to buy into your speech goals. It's like how the gripping opening scene can make viewers invested in that movie plot. That's what you're doing with the introduction. And so here's the catch. This crucial part of your speech should be prepared after you've completed the body, right? And the reason is because only then will you have a clear picture of what you need to preview. So it's kind of like, it's like creating a movie trailer. You can't do that until the entire film is shot. So once you've crafted your introduction, you want to keep it brief. Usually it's about 15% of the presentation is the introduction. That introduction should be planned for and rehearsed so that you're good to go with it word for word. And that kind of preparation ensures that you have precision, and it prevents any unnecessary tangents, because this is a really important part of your presentation. If they don't get this, they're not going to get anything else. If they don't understand the structure at the beginning, they're not going to be able to follow you. If they don't trust you at the beginning, they're not going to care. And the same thing with the justification. If you don't let them know why it matters to them at the beginning, why are they there? So it's so important that you plan this part, that yes, a lot of times it can be memorized, or at the very least practiced to a high degree of accuracy. This particular part of the speech especially. So we want to prevent any unnecessary tangents that you might go off on. Like I've had parts of presentations where I write one word in my outline for that topic, but I end up spending my whole presentation working on that, and it throws the presentation off kilter, and I end up not meeting the actual purpose that I had initially intended to when I spoke, right? Because when I spoke, I didn't plan on going on a tangent. I plan on achieving the goal of the presentation. So rehearsing is something that is super important to get you there, because practicing delivering this introduction until you feel confident is what is going to make all of these pieces come together for you. And I remember being in speech class, and I remember people telling me to practice this in front of your friends, or practice in front of your stuffed animals, or your family, or I don't care where you practice or how you practice. It just needs to be practiced. I personally can tell you that I practice first by standing and reading. I stand and I read, and I read and I stand, and then I start to reduce some of the words on the paper. And then after I'm able to mark out some of the words on the paper, I'm able to reduce the outline to a much smaller and smaller form, because I already know what I'm going to talk about in that particular part. So eventually you're able to get to your second keyword outline through that practice time. And so the preferred way to get through a presentation as far as practicing these days is to record yourself speaking. And you can do it in the bathroom, you can do it in in any kind of place. It doesn't matter how the background goes. What matters is that you're able to see yourself speak. When you're able to see yourself speak, you can critique yourself and be able to make those adjustments. And sometimes those adjustments aren't easy to make unless you see it yourself. So let me encourage you to practice all of your stuff by using your phone. Record yourself and watch yourself back, so that you can make the best version of you, the best version of your presentation through that practice tool. So remember that the success of a movie, just like the success of a speech, really hinges on that opening scene. And so I want you to make any speech introduction compelling, and that way you can get your audience hooked from the get-go. And an effective introduction to a speech is going to get their attention and make them want to listen. Introduces the topic and the main points. And also the credibility factor pushes for you to have some credibility on the topic. So to prepare the introduction, there's a lot of different ways that we can kick out this attention getter. And so one way is to share a relevant quotation. I would just say that if you're going to share a quote, know that what happens a lot of times in presentations is that someone is sharing a quote, but then the audience doesn't understand, first of all, that the person's speech actually began, right? They might still be getting settled, and so they may not hear the whole quote. They may not understand the relevance of the whole quote and how it connects to what's going on. So I would say it's commonly done, but not a preferred method I would espouse to. And another way that is done is sometimes people talk about a common ground, so they'll take that justification section and they'll expand it to really part of the attention getter also. And what happens with establishing a common ground is that you're fully allowed to make a connection with your audience. So that's what you're working to do, so that you and them can feel and be and live on the same page through the presentation. You might do something like pose a provocative question, a question that's related to what you're talking about, but then that question is leading the audience to wonder and ponder about the material that you gave them. If you pose a provocative question, I would say that it makes that justification part of the introduction really important. You got to hit them with why it matters to them or why they should care. And then humor is sometimes given. I think that old sitcoms often talk about how we use humor in presentations and, I need to start with a joke. I'll tell you that the honest truth from a speech coach is that when you start a presentation with humor, It can make you feel better as the presenter because it gets out some nervous energy, but it can run amok of your whole presentation because you might offend somebody you didn't even mean to offend. The person might only have heard part of the joke because it's part of the introduction where they're just getting settled, and so they don't understand the connectedness. It's really got to be well planned for, because it's true that humor can have a tendency to offend, and so the thing you don't want to do is to make people get turned off when your whole goal is to make them get turned on. So my preferred method for starting out a presentation, a speech, would be to tell a story. If I can tell a story, I can try to draw the audience in. I can plan that story, I can work out that story so that it applies, and then leads right into why it matters and how it connects to that audience. And so out of all the options available, that would be the one I would say, hey, kick out for that one. Show yourself for that. All right, so that's the kind of thing that we can look at for the introduction. So now that we've talked about the introduction, let's talk about the flip side, which is that conclusion. And the conclusion to your presentation is sort of that grand finale of a fireworks display. It's the final burst of light and sound that makes that show close up, and it leaves the audience in awe. It gives them something to remember. That effective conclusion doesn't just signal the end of your speech. It ties everything together, and it leaves a lasting impression. In this grand finale, you've got to revisit the main elements of the presentation. And you do that by summarizing key points, providing concise recaps for your audience. But it's more than just a summary. Your conclusion is like an invitation, because it challenges your audience to not just remember your ideas, but act on the insights, act on what you gave them in the presentation. And just like a final burst of firework, your conclusion should be memorable. It's got to provide closure, and it wraps up your ideas neatly and leaves no question that isn't related. So you want them to have a desire to learn more, to act, to reflect. We don't want them to have more questions than they came in with, or we don't want them to feel an icky, horrible kind of way, right? This is all about the recency effect. If you've ever studied what the recency effect, it's that people remember what happened based on the part of the event that happened more recent in time to them. So, for example, they might remember a funny part of your presentation, but the part that sets in with them, the part that gives them the feels from the presentation, is how you end it. So the last words that you utter in your presentation carry the weight of this connection, and they're the final note, right, in your symphony. And it's gonna have to resonate after this performance ends. So we want to craft your conclusion with care, make it meaningful, powerful, and, well, like I said, memorable. So you might, this conclusion is going to signal the end of the speech, and it's going to reiterate the thesis and the purpose of why you're doing this and these key points. But it also gives you this opportunity to drive home what you wanted them to get. And so people have a tendency to remember how you made them feel. So sometimes it's a connectedness to the topic, and sometimes, how that made them feel, and sometimes it's a connection to you. And so hopefully you can generate this feeling, and you can work to achieve that. So we can make a connection to the original attention getter. It's like if you've written that introduction, you pretty much have the conclusion down, because it's just a pattern. You just flip it and move it into the right spot, because we want to end. I'm suggesting we end our speech with what we started it with, and so that we are going to, at the very end, make reference to that attention getter. And before that happens, before we say these final words of the presentation, we want to give them something that summarizes. Okay, so we might end by summarizing the presentation, and then reminding them why it matters to them, and then end with like a connected story or a rhetorical question, or remind them about the most important aspect of the speech. But for sure, we're going to make a connection to the original attention getter. It's really uncommon to use the very end of the presentation to share new information. And if it's done that way, it might be done for emphasis, but usually we're in a position there where we want to do all of this supporting stuff to leave the audience. So with that said, I'm leaving you today, and I hope you're doing well with our topic on introductions and the conclusions.